I'd like to welcome everyone to the October 12th Walnut Creek Planning Commission. With that, Secretary Bindernagel, roll call, please.
Thank you, Chair Harrison. Commissioner Lezak,
Here.
Commissioner Kerselik,
Here.
Commissioner Pickett,
Here.
Commissioner Darling,
Here.
and Chair Harrison.
Here.
For the record, Commissioners Novin and Francois are absent. We do have 5 present. We have a quorum and may conduct business.
Consent calendar.
No items on the consent calendar.
I will transition to the public communication phase. Anyone wishing to speak on an item that is not on tonight's agenda, please come forward and fill out a speaker's card. Seeing none, we'll transition to our first public hearing item this evening. Staff report.
Thank you, Chair and the Planning Commission. My name is Chip Griffin. I'm a senior planner here with the City of Walnut Creek Planning Division, and I'm here tonight to present to you Project Y17073, the Verizon wireless cellular facility at Boundary Oak Golf Course near their maintenance facility. Requires a conditional use permit. A staff level design review will follow the use permit should the Planning Commission grant the use permit. The project site located here with this, well, here you can see the zoning and the vicinity, the zoning around the vicinity. The site location is right here. This green area here is Boundary Oak Golf Course. Back here would be Lime Ridge open space, and the neighborhoods to the north, or sorry, to the south of Valley Vista here, and then to the west of the Iron Horse Trail, or the trail is here. Looking at an aerial view, well, one last thing. Well, the site's general plan land use designation is open space recreation, as well as the zoning designation is the same, open space recreation, as is Lime Ridge, as is Arbolado Park. And we have R10 and R15 single family neighborhoods here, planned development neighborhoods here, and more R10 neighborhoods out over here. The aerial photo will show you again. You can see the star here, which is located adjacent to. It's actually it appears to be part of the maintenance facility, but it's not inside the fenced portion of the maintenance facility. I say that because there's buildings on both sides of it, and some are inside the fence. Their cart shed is outside the fence, and it's between the fence and the maintenance shed. Again, you can see the neighborhoods here in the aerial. It's pretty much the same shot, just with an aerial view, with the neighborhoods here to the west. Lime Ridge open space and Boundary Oak Golf Course. I believe this is hole 14 that takes a dog leg right that way. 14. 11. Oh. Hole 11. I stand corrected. As we zoom in towards the space, we can see the maintenance facility here, which is located and accessed off of Valley Vista Road. The address is 3800 Valley Vista Road, the address for the entire golf course. You can see the maintenance facility parking lot. There's a gate here which vehicles can pass. And then the yard back here. Here you can see the roof of the cart shed. And then the location for the site is right between the fence here and between the cart shed. You can see that there's large mature trees surrounding most of that site, and there's also large mature trees over here, which also help to screen the site from the distance views, and also large mature trees right along here. The distance from the site, the edge of the lease site, to the nearest property line, as you can see here, is around 175 feet, and then it's over 400 feet to the nearest property line, single-family residential property line to the west. We'll take a look at some site plans. Here you can see the site plan. It just shows the location hatched. We take a look at it one more time. Here's the location with some of the equipment, with the equipment shown. There is a coast live oak tree here. It's not in the greatest condition. I say that because it's leaning really heavily. But since it's on public property, and if the portion of the lease site it looks like it might be within the drip line of that tree, but since it's on public property, it doesn't require it's not subject to our tree preservation ordinance, which is only for trees that are on private property. However, we do have conditions of approval in there that the should the applicant get be granted a use permit and a building permit, that they have to have an arborist show proper drip line protection or tree root protection directions for construction of that pad and trenching of the utilities. And here's the site close up. Again, this is south down here. This is a location of a generator that has a sound, which is within a sound enclosure. Some line equipment. Here are the BTS, they're battery cabinets and equipment cabinets. Some other equipment that's attached to the fence here. And then this is the actual tree, and you can see the radius of, or the branches of the tree. In elevation, the tree shown here. You can see the top of the tree is 70 feet. The midline of these panel antennas are at 60. The lowest branch here is at 23 feet. This is from the northwest, and this is from the northeast. Or do I have that? I think I might have that reversed. In any case, it looks pretty much the same from all sides. We have a condition of approval to add those green vinyl slats in here just to bring a little opaqueness to the visible sides of the fence, which are the north and the south. If you're climbing around in there, you lost a ball, or for the maintenance guys, just to keep the equipment out of just plain sight. The applicant provided photo simulations. This is a simulation looking northeast along Valley Vista Road as you would approach the golf course. The upper is current. The simulation is the lower photo, and you can see the tree here. The simulations are pretty good as far as height goes. We're also going to require that these trees have 2.5 branches per foot, which is a pretty good density for a foul tree. Makes for a nice full tree. This photo sim looking south from the nearest fairway, which is 11. The lower upper again without the tree, and then this would be with the tree. It's one of the more open views of it right here. Photo sim looking north from the neighborhood. This is from Posey Road. Again, upper before, and then the lower with the tree. And you can see the top of the tree. And looking west as you're leaving the golf course parking lot. Again, upper current, lower, I believe it's right in there, right in that area there. The Planning Commission is asked to make 3 findings for the use permit. First, that the use, including any conditions, is consistent with the general plan and any applicable specific plans, and the zoning code, of course. There is no specific plan in this area. There are a couple general plan policies that speak to it. Chapter 4, Goal 13, Action 13.11, in regards to the compatibility with surrounding uses. It is a utility. People are relying on cell phones more and more for their everyday use. Landlines are going away. I know I don't have one. And for emergency purposes. Also, it couples with the wireless ordinance in terms of stealthing facilities and public improvements. Also, Chapter 4, Goal 18, Action 18.5.4 requires adequate screening. Zoning code would require these, what doesn't require, but it likes the applicants to first consider public properties and to consider stealth facilities, and this is consistent with both of those items. The second finding, and typically in these cases, you look at the RF report and any noise associated with the facility. The RF report came in, and I have the numbers here. They're pretty low. I think they were it was 3.2 on the ground and 2.6 at the nearest single-family property line. So there's no according to that site and the 1996 Telecommunication Act, there's no health risk associated with RF. And the noise report came in the same. I think it was 44 LDN at the nearest property line, where 60 is the requirement, or the maximum. And as far as 3 goes, there are no specific findings. With that, staff would recommend that the Planning Commission adopt the draft resolution approving the CUP as proposed. And I didn't mention that the applicant is here, Jerry, and her team is here to answer any questions. She did not prepare a presentation, but is here to answer any questions you might have. Are there any questions of staff?
Thank you. Does the commission have any questions of staff? Commissioner Darling?
Thank you for the presentation, Chip. When I was looking through the slides, a couple of the trees that are screening it looked like they were not particularly healthy. Did you notice any of that? There was a couple of the trees that, not on that one, the one before it. There was a redwood tree or two.
Aerial or the photosim?
The photosim simulations. I guess that was the one before it. 3 was the one. I guess it's not really the tree screening it, so it's other trees that are around it. The other thing I noticed in this one is that the tree actually looks blue in the photo simulation. And is that just have you seen the material that they're planning on using?
Oh,
on this tree?
you have a sample of material?
Okay. I thought it was Bob's
Yes,
Halloween
there,
costume.
There they are there. That's a sample of the broadleaf now. If you wanted to take a look at one of those in the field, Benai Shalom up on Eckley Lane has a tree. It's not nearly as tall, but it has the same type of leaf and branches that would be applied to this tree.
Okay.
And I was up there a couple weeks ago, and it looked pretty good.
Yeah, because Benai Shalom, I think they just went through and redid that one recently, didn't they? Yeah.
Right.
And you're satisfied with the color on that one now?
Much more so than it was in the past. Yes.
Okay, thank you.
Yeah, I think the material's gotten better for both broadleaf trees and the monopines.
Any other questions for staff? I have one question. Do you happen to know, and I'm not certain, I'm assuming that staff would be aware, there is I think it's the Concord Fault that's nearby. Is that in a Alquest Priola zone, and how close is this to the Concord Fault? Do you know?
I don't. It's in the general plan, but the scale would probably not do it justice. I don't know the answer to that question.
Because I know it runs up Sutton for a ways, and I don't know what happens after that.
Of course, these trees do go through a pretty strenuous structural calculation, but we'll make sure that's.
I was just wondering, was it in the
review?
I was just wondering if it was in the zone. Is there additional site engineering necessary?
Yeah,
given that this is
I
gonna
don't know
be
the answer to that question.
a critical piece of infrastructure.
Obviously, we'll have the staff confirm this, but I believe the Alquist Priola zone is further to the east. I did a project over there.
Seeing no further questions, I'll open the public hearing. And it's my understanding the applicant does not have a presentation for the commission this evening?
Correct. Yeah, we just went through we discussed it. We just went through the plans.
Okay. So next, are there any speakers that would like to speak on this particular subject? Please come forward and fill out a speaker's card if you have not done so. Okay, thank you.
I'm Robert Finlayson. I live at 190 Firestone Drive, which is just around the corner from there. So I have a few questions on this that I'd like to have answered. What would the benefits to local Verizon users be? What problems or difficulties are anticipated in putting this in? I presume there'll be some construction in there, but there's no outlining of what problems or difficulties may be there. How long will it take to build this and put it in place? In other words, how long would the construction last? And I presume there would be some impact on up and down the Valley Vista Road. Are there any costs to the city involved in this? Is it going to be impacting the work that they do at that yard? In the contract, it says you're recommending that they would exit from this. As I see on here, I read on here, staff suggests that the applicant be responsible for removal and abatement of all equipment on site within 30 days. Is that going to happen, or is that just a suggestion that has yet to happen? When would the work start if this was approved? And finally, how did we arrive at the lease purchase rental price? It's $22,000 a year. I'm curious as to how we got to that number. What does it represent? And appreciate your input on those questions.
Thank you. Is there anyone else from the public that would like to address the commission? Seeing none, I'm going to ask the applicant to please respond to the questions.
Good evening, commissioners and members of the public. My name is Jerry Johnson. I'm here with Complete Wireless Consulting on behalf of Verizon Wireless. To answer the first question, the benefits to the community are improved wireless services, which includes internet, data, less dropped calls, better reception. So it's just an overall improvement in wireless services to the community. Two, the construction period is typically 2 months. During that time, we do our best to avoid or reduce any disruptions to the public during the construction period. With respect to when we discontinue use of the facility, Verizon does remove the facility. So there would be no issue with having a tower that's not in use remain in place. The third, and I believe that was all of your questions. Have I answered all of your questions, sir? I don't know that, sir. That would be determined by the building department if a conditional use permit is granted. That is a negotiation between, that's probably best answered by the commission.
We'll have staff respond to a few of the questions pertaining to the lease and the condition of approval. So before, I just had one question.
Yes.
While you're here up at it's a Verizon operated facility. Are there other carriers that are able to utilize that facility when it's operating?
Yes, that's one of the benefits is co-location. So future opportunities for other carriers to add their antennas on the broadleaf is one of the benefits.
It's feasible.
Yes.
Okay, thank you. And staff, could you respond?
Could I ask a quick question while she's here? Does the pole show up as one pole, or does it have to be assembled on site? Do you know?
I am not, I don't have the specifics with respect to the construction, but it is one pole that will be constructed at the facility.
Okay, thank you.
In terms of the lease agreement, there's some staff here, Barry Slavin, the golf course manager, and Jackie Harbor from Recreation is here, and they were involved in the negotiation. If you wanted to ask any questions regarding the lease negotiation, they're probably the best suited to do so.
Maybe they could provide just a quick overview of the rationale and methodology, how we came up to a lease amount.
Thank you.
Good evening, Commissioners. Barry Slavin. I'm the liaison to the Boundary Oak Golf Course for the city. Just a little bit of history. I've been in this position. I left the Planning Commission nearly 11 years ago to take this position. This is the fourth time we have been approached by an operator, a provider, and this one, because of location, seemed to be the best fit for all concerned. We studied other contracts, both what the city had and what we know about in terms of golf courses and other areas to determine what was a fair rental price. And after some negotiation and consultation, again, with our city attorney and with Verizon, we came to an agreement that was slightly greater than what Verizon originally wanted to provide, but we felt we could live with. So in terms of the question of the cost to the city that came up, there should be no cost to the city other than the planning process itself. So I hope that helps.
In regard to the planning process, I believe we're a full cost recovery, so whatever the cost is to process the application, there isn't a cost.
Correct.
And then all of the utilities and everything associated with their facility, that's completely metered.
Correct.
That Verizon's responsible for,
Correct.
correct? Okay,
Yes.
thank you.
Sure.
Are there any other speakers that would like to address the commission? Seeing none, I'm going to close the hearing, and I'll bring it back to the commission for any deliberations or comments. I'll start first with Commissioner Elizak.
Thank you. My thought process is, of course, what does it look like? What's the visual impact? This is a pretty big tree, and it's actually looks healthier than any of the other trees, I think, than around. And then my second thought is, what are the other environmental concerns, impacts? I think noise is probably my biggest concern. If I'm hitting a golf ball on the 11th hole and I'm in the zone, what is that generator going to do to my shot? But it seems like the staff has adequately answered those questions, and so from my perspective, it's a positive thing for the city to have an opportunity for that revenue. It's a positive thing for wireless users to have that additional facility. So generally speaking, I'm in favor.
Commissioner Kraselic?
I also think it's a benefit to the public. Obviously, there's a need here. It seems to be in a great location. It's far away from a lot of single-family residences. It's out in the golf course. The generator noise should be minimal, might actually help my golf game. And I think it brings in a little revenue to the city that'll help support the golf course and other things, so I'm in favor as well.
Commissioner Pickett?
Yeah, I think it's a well-hidden location. I would support the application, and it's not going to have any effect on my golf game.
Commissioner Darling?
Yeah, thank you, staff, for working on this. I appreciate the effort you've put into and making sure that it is a tree that actually hopefully looks like a tree, because that's my biggest concern here with this one, because my golf game, there's nothing that could affect it. And I think you've done a good job of ensuring that this tree is going to actually meet the stealth objective. And so it sounds like we're good from a noise perspective. We're good from a visual perspective. And so I'm willing to support this.
I concur. I think that the staff and the applicant have worked well to try and find something that harmonizes with the environment of the golf course and the existing vegetation. With that, is there a motion?
I'll move to approve application Y17-073, Verizon Wireless Broadleaf at Boundary Oaks Golf Course.
I'll second.
Roll call vote, please.
Certainly. Commissioner Lezak,
Yes.
Commissioner Pickett,
Yes.
Chair Harrison,
Yes.
Commissioner Kerselik,
Yes.
and Vice Chair Darling.
Yes.
The ayes have it unanimously 5-0.
Ethan, could I ask you a quick question while you're gathering your papers up there? If another operator wanted to co-locate on the pole, would they also need a conditional use permit?
They would.
And they'd have to go through the same process?
They would. We'd want to ensure again that they're meeting all and complying with all the zoning regulations, general plan, et cetera.
Right.
To add additional equipment on the existing pole?
Correct. Okay. Yeah.
Thank
But
you.
there's established now a location for that, so.
Thank you.
To add to that, they'd also need a ground lease site as well, a separate ground lease site.
Okay, we're going to transition now to our second public hearing item.
Good evening. Before I begin, I'd like to fix the lights so that everyone in the audience can see that. Presentation. Or I could just magically ask Matt to handle that, thank you. That said, my name is Ethan Bindernagel. I'm planning manager for the city of Walnut Creek. I'm here to present to the Planning Commission this evening a proposed zoning ordinance text amendment to the wireless communications facility ordinance, which you were all just involved with on the previous application. And specifically, we're looking to carve out an exemption for small cell antennas, which are the latest wave of technology advance in the telecommunications industry. I'd like to touch upon, if I may quickly, well, I'll get right into the presentation with a couple of slides, and I'll be happy to answer any questions you may have. As we know, as you just learned, as you just went through, we have an existing process, and typically we look for, well, as this relates to the Senate bill that was passed, I'm highlighting a specific portion of our ordinance. In a residential zone within 300 feet of a residentially zoned property, any wireless facility proposed within that area needs a use permit. And that's an example. We've seen those here before. Similarly, though, if you are outside that zone, if you're more than 300 feet away from a residentially zoned property, you simply need design review, typically handled at staff level. Very good. However, if you are a monopole and you are within or without 300 feet, you're either in or within or you're outside 300 feet, regardless, as you just witnessed, you do need a use permit. You also need design review. Those are the three situations for our existing process as it applies to small cells, as it applies to macro cells, as it applies to cell technology in general, and the installation thereof in the city of Walnut Creek. Along came Senate Bill 649, and this is a bill that would apply to small cells specifically, and I want to highlight this because I think in having reread my staff report, I may not have been as clear as I could have been, and I want to make sure I take the opportunity to be clearer tonight. This bill applies to small cells specifically, not macro sites such as the one you just saw, right? Not the panel antennas 50 feet up in the air, but small cells that are located or proposed for location within the right-of-way on streets, whether on a city pole or a PG&E pole or any utility pole, or if they are proposed as a small cell within a commercially zoned property or an industrially zoned property. We have none of the latter. We do have the former, of course, in Walnut Creek. So this is really about this is about right-of-way and commercially zoned properties. According to Senate Bill 649, as the industry is trying to deploy in a quicker fashion, there is no discretionary approval required. Now, I just showed you in our existing process, we certainly have discretionary review, and you are testament to that. You, or according to Senate Bill 649, you as a carrier would be subject only to issuance of permits for encroachment permit or a building permit. So a ministerial action by you may charge a limited fee. You will not be getting $22,000 a year. That's the Senate bill that was passed September 14th by the state legislature in their close of their session. According to state law, the governor has 30 days to act. The governor may do one of three options. Number one, sign the bill. Number two, veto the bill. Number 3, take no action, the law becomes law, or the bill becomes law 30 days after it's passed by both houses. So the date for action would be no later than October 15th. We're close, but not quite there yet. And as of yet, there has been no notice or legislative update from the governor's office related to this bill. That took longer than I thought it would. Anyway, but there is an exception carved out within the legislative language for existing agreements, and that's part of the reason, the drive, the impetus for this change to our ordinance. It preserves existing agreements, this is verbatim from the bill, between wireless service providers and local governments for the leasing or licensing of vertical infrastructure, fancy way for utility or street pole, for small cell attachments. And therefore, if you have one of these agreements in place, the state law would allow for that and would honor that commitment. However, you need to have it in place before January 1. Now, that's on the assumption staff's making that the bill will become law. So that's the timeline we're operating under. But it's important. And again, as an existing agreement, we looked at that as an opportunity. Hence the opportunity for a change in our ordinance, which also happens to be consistent with our blueprint for success, which has been brought here before your body before. And specifically, we looked to expedite, it was one of our actions, expedite telecom permitting. This would fall under that rubric. It would apply only to small cell antennas, obviously this changed specifically. And to give you some context, you just went through a hearing for a use permit for a monopole, but it was a use permit for a facility. We received in the last 30 days 31 applications for use permits for small cells. Currently, our ordinance applies, and therefore there will be 31 resolutions, 31 hearings before this body within the shot clock period provided, which is another layer of bureaucracy. But the point is, coming soon to you, 31 applications, resos, and everything else associated from AT&T and Verizon are the two applicants. So staff uses this as also an opportunity to streamline and to create an exemption for small cells that would avoid 31 applications coming your way. Should the Planning Commission provide a positive recommendation to City Council, which is what staff is recommending, Council is set to hear and hold their first reading next Tuesday, the 17th. Then the second reading would be held the 7th of November. 30 days later, it would become effective, hence it would become the new law on December 8th, which would give us time from now until that date, time to work through with carriers an agreement, which we have been diligently pursuing, such that we hope to go back to council the very last meeting of the year in hopes, fingers crossed, that we have a master lease agreement to present and for them to ratify, to sign, to execute. That said, our recommendation for the commission to consider, we recommend City Council adoption of the proposed zoning ordinance amendment. With that, I'll close and be happy to answer any questions.
Are there any questions of staff? Commissioner Pickett?
Yeah, could you give us, or at least me, a better description of a small cell site versus what you referred to as a macro?
Absolutely. No, thank you for that, and it's a great point to clarify. Small cell antennas, and I'll just start with the obvious in terms of dimensional requirements and other things. They're typically between 2 to 4 feet in height. They are typically of a diameter such that they can fit atop your typical utility pole, which in circumference is about 35 to 45 inches in diameter, depending on the class of the pole. So if you think about that circumference, that's about a foot across at most. And so these antennas typically sit atop that at an extra 2 to 4 feet in height for the antenna themselves. Now, there is equipment associated with that antenna facility and a lot of cables, because these are not standalone necessarily like a macro site, such as the one you saw earlier this evening, where it's a standalone, propagates a signal, has a receiver, has equipment cabinets, has its own generator, etc. That's not the case for small cells. They have far less equipment comparatively, though they still have equipment. Typically that equipment is mounted on the side of the pole, utility pole, city pole, etc. Or some of it may be ground mounted. And these are some of the details that staff is working through in a master lease agreement to clarify with the carriers. And that is the associated equipment. There are some numbers, facts, and figures presented in the bill specifically in terms of limitations on the number of cubic feet that equipment cannot exceed a certain amount depending on the type of equipment presented. But generally speaking, these antennas are smaller, thinner, sit atop a pole, and are perceived to be generally less obtrusive until you actually start to look at some of them. That's why we've also engaged the carriers on the design on another parallel track. Is that helpful?
Yeah. can they be mounted on the side of a building?
I'm going to say they probably can, because the bill provides for commercially zoned properties. I would assume there would be opportunities for the carriers to do that if they can take advantage. But the advantage of a utility pole or a street light is the cable that comes from the antenna it's a backhaul, meaning it's a fiber cable that runs to fiber, and it connects a network from one cell to the next. These are not antennas that need to see each other to propagate a signal. They're connected by a cord, in essence, which goes to a macro. So the carriers have these macro sites. The problem is, as we all have experienced, you drop a call, but it's not really about dropping a call anymore. It's really about the data-heavy usage that these networks are experiencing. And what they're trying to look for is crutches, if you will, along the way between macro sites that can help to propagate the signal and provide greater capacity. They're smaller. They have a smaller radius in terms of their serviceability area, but they provide more capacity. And so the idea would be, though smaller and less powerful, they still provide a needed capacity across the network. They can be surgically located on a utility pole and serve a broader area. If you're on a building, you could have interference, among other things.
So when you're talking about utility poles, you're talking about the wood poles that line our streets or
Yes.
something like that.
Mm-hmm.
And you described it as approximately 4 feet, 2 to 4 feet high,
Mm-hmm.
and roughly 12 inches in diameter
At most, is my
at
understanding.
most. So that's less than 4 cubic feet.
For the antenna, correct?
But the ordinance defines it as 6 cubic feet.
Correct.
Is that to accommodate the auxiliary equipment that's necessary for it?
There are other considerations, and I'm sure that there is no applicant for this evening. There is no applicant requesting this change, and so this is a staff-led initiative. But my understanding in talking with a couple of the carriers is that what I'll say is I'm sure that the legislature saw to it to include flexibility in terms of the technology that might grow, and that these antennas might grow a bit or be wider or whatnot. But that's we are mirroring the state law in our exception language, so that we don't necessarily start to have a conflict there. And again, to be clear, the proposed change this evening, if adopted and if council goes forth with it, would really be applicable for the next 3 months or so. The point of the change is to make the change to allow us to engage a master lease agreement to ensure that we have design considerations, among other things, in the future. Because right now, the wireless ordinance doesn't allow for exemptions for small cells. It doesn't allow you to enter into an agreement. And so the thought is, well, if we change the language and mirror the state bill, it allows us time to negotiate with the carriers, ensure that our needs are met, that the community's intent of our ordinance is met, the community is satisfied, but it also provides an opportunity for us to work collaboratively and to streamline our permitting.
Okay. Do we have any of these in the city right now?
We have applications for them, and I don't know that we have any yet, but we are considering them, as I said, 31 locations between AT&T and Verizon.
So is there some discretion that we can exercise in terms of the color? For instance, if you put it on a wood pole, is it going to be a white thing sticking on top of that? Or?
We are considering that, and we have engaged as an exhibit to the master lease agreement that's in draft form and not really ready for public view. We are talking about those exact conditions.
Have you seen these things in other communities?
I have.
Do you have pictures of? Not
I
that.
didn't bring any with because we really don't want to get onto the design consideration necessarily, but it's allowing the mechanism to consider what you're discussing. I've seen them in other communities, and that's why we're engaging the carriers.
Yeah, because I recall that we had a application many years ago on the building that's at the corner of San Luis Road and North Main, and they put multiple antennas. I don't know if those would qualify as a small.
They would not.
Because there were multiple?
No, because they're not the same technology. Those were independent. That was a macro antenna site, because at that time when that was under consideration, small cells were not even around.
Right, okay. All right, well, that helps understand visually what we're talking about when 6 cubic feet seems like a pretty big structure, but I guess that just accommodates the flexibility you're talking about.
I would assume. That's my assumption. Yeah.
All right, thanks.
Commissioner Darling?
Okay, thanks, Ethan. So just to make sure I'm understanding, so the Senate bill language defining a small cell is the same as what's in the ordinance?
We copy pasted.
Okay. And then as far as the process, it sounds like you guys are going to go through a process up with the design standards.
Correct.
Are those design standards going to come back to either the Design Review Commission or the Planning Commission?
They
Or
would
are
not.
they're just we're going to have to trust you on those?
We are taking the intent of the ordinance. We are looking at all 3 use permit findings and all 19 design review condition findings that are embedded in the ordinance, and we're taking those all into consideration. We're looking at what other cities have done, Dublin among others, South San Francisco. We're considering this community's intent in terms of when it adopted the ordinance, what was important, what was valued at that time, and what remains valuable to this community. All of that is influencing staff's direction in terms of pursuing a course with the carriers. And let me, as you know, with any negotiation, you're not always guaranteed to come to a conclusion that everyone is pleased with or that you come to an agreement.
Yes.
But we want the opportunity,
We
and
always like
that's
to look in on what you're doing.
no. It's really, this is really a matter of allowing us to continue down that path,
Okay.
which we don't have the opportunity currently.
Because I did spend some time Google imaging small cell sites, and some of them are just fine, and some of them are
Not.
not. They're less than optimal, primarily because they start to look like spaghetti because of the cabling, or because of the associated facilities. And it sounds like the cabinets, I think in your staff report you talked about the equipment cabinets being one of the areas where you guys have not yet found direction.
We are working through.
Okay.
Correct.
So it sounds like the lease agreement is going to be a staff-driven process. Is it going to go to the city council at the end for ratification?
Yes, and I apologize. There is oversight to that degree, correct?
Okay.
We are going to city council with a master lease agreement to which an exhibit will be attached that says these are the design, these standard kind of conditions, part and parcel of this agreement. If the council has any reason not to agree, they, of course, are one of the parties to the agreement.
Okay.
If some parties don't agree, you don't have an agreement.
And then as far as the process from there, do you think right now, it sounds like you have 31 applications in, are all of those likely to fit under the lease agreement, or are we still going to see some that are outliers to that, do you think?
My understanding is all 31 would fit under this exemption.
Okay. And, excuse me, I'm getting used to my new technology. So it sounds like you're expecting the agreement will include the paint and the conduits being in, the cabling being in conduits and antennas being hidden. Is there any way have you guys thought about in the lease agreement incentivizing, because it looked like there was different technology. There's kind of like the Kmart and the Neiman Marcus, incentivizing, is there a way to incentivize the better concealed small cell technology in the lease agreement?
We'd like to think so. We're trying to pursue that.
Okay, so you are looking at okay, if you do this, then you can get X something. There's a way to incentivize in that agreement.
We're thinking through strategies, yeah.
All right, thank you.
Commissioner Krasalik?
Ethan, you said these sites have to be hardwired together.
They are part of the fiber network backbone that are typically, as I understand it, and I'm not an expert, but my understanding in a couple of meetings is that the macro sites are kind of the backbone, the endpoints, and that between there would be a thread of fiber to which each of these small cells would attach, such that you don't have a small cell being the propagator, the sole contributor, the sole supplier of the network. It would be the macro sites driven with the small cells in between, if that makes sense.
So that could also be some new installations that would have to occur as part of that improvement.
Certainly.
Thank you.
So I'm sorry, Commissioner Lezak?
I have a quick follow-up question on some of the other things that were said. So trying to understand the 31 applications that you have in now, trying to completely understand that the city is trying to respond to something that the state has done and trying to take advantage of this small window of opportunity to try to work out something that would be best for the city. Why would the wireless carriers want to participate in a negotiation of an agreement? And if that doesn't happen, what's the opportunity for us to hear 31 applications next week and them not to be subject to the new regular? I guess I'm just trying to understand why all of a sudden there's 31 applications, what's going on behind all this, and what's the incentive for them to come to the table to agree to some of the things that we'd all like to have be part of this.
Well, I think actually the juxtaposition of SB 649, which has been going through the legislature for the last 6 to 9 to 12 months, and the fact that we did receive applications, it seems very clear where the legislation is heading. And so the question might be, and you'd have to ask a carrier yourself, but I would surmise after having a couple of talks with them, that there's a real incentive, there's a real interest, there's a real advantage to getting in. So similarly, we may have asked the question, why are you filing an application and paying a fee and going through this process when you could just wait 3 months? And I think the fact that they have dropped applications and are pursuing through our process currently, which again, they could just bypass in 3 months potentially, I think that's telling. And so I think that there's a real advantage to the carriers to get in. I don't want to call it a land grab, but for a lack of a better way to describe it, the first one in can set the tone. Again, you look at a poll, there's not a lot of and I know for a fact that co-location can't happen with these instruments. And therefore, if you grab the intersection of Main and Civic, you're likely boxing out the competition. And so I think there's probably incentive for a land grab. And that's, I don't know, I am not an agent of the carriers. I am surmising that that's probably the incentive.
Yeah, that's helpful. Thank you.
So while you have 2 of the 4 carriers, the other 2 carriers, if they just do nothing for the balance of the year, which is roughly 75 days, and then file applications January 2nd, they could come in with facilities that may not have the same design criteria because they don't have a pre-existing agreement prior to January 1st.
That could be the case. I think, and that's also telling. If you look at who has applied, back to your point, it's the 2 potentially the major leaders in the industry, and you're not seeing. I won't pick on anyone. You're not seeing other carriers coming in yet, and it could be that they're waiting. It may be an incentive for them just to wait and hang back. I don't know. This is all
it's all speculative.
It's all speculative.
I understand that.
But what I really want to focus on is the city's trying to take advantage, to your point, of this small window. And we're trying to engage, and currently our ordinance doesn't allow us to do that. We could come to an agreement, and it wouldn't be legal. And so we need to make this legislative change in order to allow us to continue to proceed such that we may get to an agreement. And if we make this change, and at the end of the year we made it and nothing happened, well, the law was going to change it anyway. So why not take advantage, and what's the harm? And that's kind of, if I could say kind of in a layman's kind of speak, what's the harm? Is kind of the approach that we're trying to take to say, look, let's make a change and see if we can get to an agreement.
I concur. I just think you have a lot of work cut out for you to get it accomplished in roughly 60 days.
We've engaged the carrier since June, so we are not new to this. We have certainly we've circulated drafts. We've been talking about design considerations. We've been talking about our intentions. We've been talking about our values as a community. So I think we're, though we are a bit late perhaps in making the official change, I think we've been moving along.
Okay. Any other questions?
And how many carriers are talking to you?
2.
And presumably, if the governor vetoes the bill, then you guys can kind of like take a second and think about your strategy.
We could catch our breath if needed, or reevaluate based on. I mean, it also depends on what the veto statement says, and how quickly the legislature would respond to that veto statement. And there are a lot of things that could play out there.
Okay, yeah, it's that old game.
True. Okay, thank you.
Sure.
I'm going to now open up the public hearing. Is there anyone from the public that would like to address the commission on this particular item? Seeing none, I'm going to close the hearing and bring it back to the commission for deliberations. And I'll start with Commissioner Lezak.
So I don't have much to say other than, we just make a recommendation. It's up to the city council to decide what to do here. But it seems to me that, we're concerned about design and the design standards element that I think we understand from the very good responses that we're going to just have to trust staff to represent us in those design standard negotiations, and that I generally am supportive of this opportunity because it's unfortunate I mean, sometimes I do agree that we as cities and as a local community will create bureaucratic roadblocks to new technologies and policies that are challenging. But we do it with the best intent for the folks that we represent, and so it's frustrating that the state or the federal government might create these rules. And I think it's great that staff has been looking ahead to this and is jumping on it, and that there's an opportunity here to try to get win-win. And even if that doesn't happen, at least I'm thankful that staff finds those opportunities to be proactive. So I'm obviously supportive.
Commissioner Kraselic?
I'm also supportive, and I'll simply add thanks for the hard work. It sounds like you tried to get ahead of this, and you've still got a lot of work to do, and good luck.
Commissioner Pickett?
Yeah, I'm supportive of this, although I'll miss seeing cellular applications on our agendas in the future. But it is, I think, because of the rapid changes in the technology in the industry and our reliance on it, it's important to make it a more efficient process. It's very inefficient now for significant benefits, so I'd be supportive.
Commissioner Darling?
Yeah, I too appreciate staff's work on this. I think you've done a lot of thought about in the negotiation and where your points of leverage are and what the community's objectives are, and trying to find a way to meet the community's objectives on a very tight time frame. I just would encourage you, if we do have a Hail Mary out of the governor's office and he vetoes it, take a quick breath and think about whether or not there's a chance, because we're all interested in those design standards, is whether or not there's an opportunity to bring the lease agreement back here at that point. If the bill goes through, then just run as fast as you can and get it done by January 1.
I concur. I think I think we're very fortunate that the two major wireless carriers approached the city to try and negotiate a deal up front, and they're probably picking some of the sites that have the highest visibility. So the best that we can do to try and reduce those aesthetic impacts into our community benefits all of us. So with that, is there a motion or recommendation from the commission to the city council?
Yeah, I'd move that the Planning Commission recommends to the City Council that they adopt the proposed amendment to the Wireless Communication Facilities Ordinance.
Is there a second?
Second.
Roll call, please.
I'm sorry, just for the record, I just wanted to clarify that recommendation is in the form of a resolution. So you are adopting a resolution making that recommendation.
Yes.
Roll call vote, please.
Commissioner Lezak,
Yes.
Commissioner Kraselic,
Yes.
Chair Harrison,
Yes.
Commissioner Darling,
Yes.
and Commissioner Pickett.
Yes.
The motion carries unanimously.
Commission considerations?
There were no commission considerations.
Can we talk a little bit about our iPads?
It's your meeting.
Is that all right with the
So we
chairman?
want to put that under our commission member announcements? Or complaints?
Announcements are, it's questions,
Okay.
whatever.
Yes.
I just had a couple of
Go right ahead.
questions, and maybe somebody else has other questions. Number one is, one of the items we got as the attachments was in a Microsoft Word format, and we couldn't make notations on that. And I don't know if anybody else encountered that, but I wanted to make notations on it, and I couldn't. With this, also, we can't make comments or notes in the margins or anything of the agenda itself. And I don't know, I used to always find that helpful. I always carry a pen, write stuff, so if we're trying to get rid of use of paper, that might be something worth considering. I also during the course of a hearing, I use Google Maps a lot. It's just a convenient tool to get a little different perspective or different bearings than what we might have in our exhibits. And I don't think, I couldn't get it on here. I don't think we can. That would be a helpful addition. And with the new process we have, I think I can get rid of my stone tablet. Not sure yet, but I'm trying to. But we used to get in our packets a list of upcoming meetings for all the commissions and the council, and that's not really critical, but it was really nice to kind of know what was coming up. And a lot of times I would, if I saw something on design review that I thought was coming to the planning commission, I might watch the design review hearing or go look at it just so I know what's coming down the pipeline. It allowed me to do my job better. I don't see that we get it. We don't get it on here, so I don't know how we can incorporate that into this paperless process. So those are my comments.
I'll pass those along to the city clerk. I appreciate that feedback. It's really valuable, especially related to the app, the Google Maps app, and also related to the upcoming meetings or the agendas for upcoming meetings for other commissions and council. We can figure out a way to accommodate that.
May I add to that? So, just as a clarification for the public, for those that don't know, the Planning Commission is having its first paperless commission meeting, and we thank the city for bringing us to that level. I think it's a great way to save all that money of all those mailing costs and the paper that's being printed. I like Bob, I'm coming up to speed with the technology, but I did notice that there are still some things that are occasionally being mailed, like what's the list of the upcoming list of items on the agenda or projected agenda items. And I think just to support what Bob is saying is that there are these supplemental things that used to come in the package that aren't in the package now. I don't need you to mail me things now that we've gone paperless. Those handful of little things could easily be emailed to us as a group, and I'm pleased that we're paperless. It's going to take some adjustment for us, but I think it's a great thing in that the city has shown itself as a significant leader within the local group of cities is by moving in that direction. So thank you.
Staff reports or announcements?
I wanted to, I spoke with a couple of you prior to the start of the meeting this evening, but I wanted to put on your radars. We're coming up on holiday season, as we all know. In November and December, we typically have 2 meetings per month, but given holiday season, we will be curtailing or at least shrinking the number of meetings we've gotten on the agenda. So typically we'd have a meeting the second or fourth Thursday, which is Thanksgiving. We will not be having one in November, and so I'm wondering, I'd like to poll the commission or just to think about, we don't need an answer this evening, and maybe I can follow up via email, but I'd like for you to think about potentially a special meeting, a second meeting, both in November and then another in December. The dates of which that we're currently targeting are November 16th and December 7th. So if you can be thinking or checking your calendars for availability. If we do have a quorum and we can take advantage of that date, we certainly have plenty of work we'd like to bring to the commission, and we'd like to take advantage if we can. That concludes my report.
Okay, thank you. Next regular meeting is on October 26th.
Correct.
And with that, our meeting is adjourned.
Correct.